Around 8 months ago, I made a video ranting over some of Nintendo's shady business practices and how fanboys give them credit for things that they don't really deserve. Well, the video itself performed well, and some people in the comments wanted me to make a sequel to it. So I figured, why not make a part 2, since Nintendo did a lot of things, even within the last 15 years, that fanboys like to forget, and I think those things deserve to be called out. So, due to popular demand, I'm going to go over some of Nintendo's more recent blunders. During the Wii era, Nintendo was trying to appeal to a more casual audience. While it made them a lot of money, it's obvious that throughout the 7th gen, and even during the beginning of the 8th gen, Nintendo was being seen more and more by their hardcore audience as a third wheel. Now, I'm not trying to completely shit on the Wii. I had one as a kid, and there were some good third-party exclusives you couldn't find anywhere else, but for every Xenoblade Chronicles and No More Heroes, there were about 50 Mario Kart clones made by developers who just wanted to make a quick buck. Even Nintendrons can't deny that the bulk of the Wii's library was just shovelware, or ports of already existing games with a tacked-on motion control gimmick. So for example, games that already existed on the GameCube or the PS2, like Resident Evil 4 or Okami, would force you to aim using the Wiimote instead of the analog stick. I know for some people they actually consider this to be the definitive way of playing these games, but it's really on a case-by-case basis, and it's subjective depending on how much of the game relies on motion controls for gameplay immersion. And as you already know, Nintendo really muddied up the water with this back then. Because on the one hand, you had people who hated the motion controls and wished that Nintendo would have a standard controller as default like everyone else, but on the other hand, you had people that genuinely enjoyed the motion controls for certain games and felt like it added some gameplay depth that couldn't be replicated by just hitting the A button or moving the analog stick. As weird as it sounds, I see the argument on both sides, but lean more towards the crowd who wishes that Nintendo just used a standard controller as the default. By forcing a controller gimmick, Nintendo indirectly created a void that can never be filled. Sometimes a game that was originally made for the Wii can be ported to other platforms just fine with remapped standard controls, and some gameplay tweaks, but other times playing a game that originally had motion controls with standard controls can feel awkward or shallow if the developers who made it had motion controls in mind when designing the game from the get-go. Another fun fact about the Wii is that it did not have HD capabilities, during a time when that was beginning to become the standard. So the highest resolution that you're going to get is 480p on a video game console that's only slightly more powerful than the GameCube. When you compare that to their competition like Sony with the PS3, or Microsoft with the Xbox 360, which both provided huge leaps in graphical capabilities compared to their predecessors and ran at 1080p, it's pathetic. But regardless, fanboys would hold on to their Wiis and be complacent with Nintendo for all of this, under the lame bullshit excuse that I'm sure you've all heard a million times back then. I don't play games for graphics and frame rates, I play them to have fun. Which is a complete deflection that Nintendrons use as a mantra to justify the shitty performance of the box that they worshipped. Graphics and frame rate do matter, especially to third-party companies that, for example, couldn't release their latest projects on the Wii because it was just a souped-up GameCube, the Wii U because it's not as powerful as the PS4, or the Switch because it's relying on outdated mobile hardware from 2015. And it's great that Nintendo can be the little engine that could, in their little hug box, and program Mario and Zelda games that still sell millions of copies with such a modest hardware ceiling. But third-party companies like Sega, Capcom, and especially Square Enix make games that require a little bit more power. And despite what Nintendrons would have you believe, they need third-party support in order for their platform of choice to be successful. So I've already ranted enough about the Wii, now I want to focus more on the Wii U, which, in my opinion, is the biggest dark age for Nintendo and the era where their fanboys were the most smug. Say what you want about the Wii and the fanboys who kissed its ass, it made Nintendo a lot of money. Say what you want about the Switch and the fanboys who kiss its ass, it has a lot of good third-party exclusives that you can't get anywhere else, and it's one of the best-selling systems of all time. Even Nintendo fanboys who were kissing the Wii U's ass back when it was relevant don't defend the Wii U so much anymore. I tried watching Scott the Woz's video on the dark age of Nintendo, and even though he was critical where it was necessary, I don't think he was being critical enough. There was so much bullshit that Nintendo got away with back then that was tolerated by their core audience that it's astounding. You could be a gay dude in the closet who bleaches his butthole, irons his underwear, and everyone would think you'd be less in denial about your sexuality than a Nintendo fanboy would be about how much of a failure the Wii U was at the time. One of the things that Nintendo introduced were amiibos. I remember graduating high school hearing about these dumbass little figurines that were being sold out at regular stores and being flipped on eBay, People went apeshit over these things like mana falling down from the sky, but in practice, all they did was do the exact same thing that other companies have been doing since the late 2000s, except worse. It's DLC. Because if you wanted to play as a certain character, you actually had to find the amiibo yourself and figure out where to get them. Some amiibos were exclusive to Walmart, others you could only find at Target, but apparently it's okay, because it's just taking the concept of DLC and turning it into something tangible and creative. Like, could you imagine if the PS3 and Xbox 360 did the same thing that Nintendo was doing, and Sony was selling Dark and Light Jack figurines for PlayStation All-Stars? Or if Capcom sold a Dante figurine with his original white hair that you could link up to the Devil May Cry reboot? People would lose their fucking shit. But when Nintendo did it, their core audience didn't bat an eye over it. Another thing about the Wii U era that people resented was the whole tablet gimmick. In a stark contrast to the Wii and its whole motion control gimmick, only like 2% of the Wii U library utilized the second tablet screen for their games, and it makes perfect sense why that would be the case. Third-party developers were easy to embrace motion controls on the Wii, because if the console was a failure, the gimmick just never caught on, or they wanted to remaster a game that used said gimmick on other platforms in HD, they could easily rework the motion controls to a standard controller, maybe add some gameplay tweaks to compensate, port it to another platform, and it'd be playable. You know, just remapping the Wiimote slashes to the A button, or moving the hand cursor to the right analog stick, the touchscreen, or the mouse. Sure, some of the immersion would be lost if the game in question heavily relied on the motion controls, but it's at least reworkable. In the Wii U's case, this isn't just an issue with remapping controls or adding in gameplay tweaks. This is an issue of relying on a completely separate piece of hardware that came attached to the controller on the console it was designed for, that being a secondary screen. And the only way you can port or remaster a game like that for a separate console is to take what would be showing on the tablet screen and put it in the corner as a picture-in-picture mode. And this is way more awkward to deal with. To some people, including me, remasters like No More Heroes HD or Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition are more comfortable to play with a regular controller. You can agree or disagree with me about that, but it is what it is. It's my opinion. However, remasters like the modern ports of Wonderful 101 now rely on a picture-in-picture mode to make the game work the way it was supposed to, because it was originally made with the Wii U tablet controller in mind. As a result, the remaster of Wonderful 101 ends up looking like a Frankenstein's monster of ideas that got butchered due to Nintendo's weaponized autism. This is an objectively inferior experience. It may not bother you as much as it does for someone else, but if the PS4 and Xbox One had controllers with a secondary screen to project to, we would all be playing the game like that instead, so nothing covers up the main screen. Also, what the fuck was up with Nintendo and cameras? Why did the Wii U controller need a camera specifically? To the 12 people who actually bought a Wii U, were you walking around with your controller taking pictures and capturing videos? Because if I saw you doing that, you'd look like a total jackass and I would point and laugh. Say what you want about the DSi replacing the GBA component for the camera app, it at least made more sense because you were expected to carry it around. Anyway. Later on in 2015, Nintendo would come out with their own partnership program on YouTube, and for those of you guys who don't know what any of that means, I'll elaborate. This isn't really a relevant thing anymore since people don't really partner up with MCNs like they used to, but back in the mid to late 2010s, you could partner up your YouTube channel with an MCN or a multi-channel network. And the idea is they help recommend your content and push you into the algorithm for a cut of whatever revenue you make through AdSense. So now you're probably thinking, well, what's wrong with Nintendo creating one of those? And it's because back then they were striking down a bunch of videos related to their content. They still do this today, but back then it was like you couldn't even do a Let's Play of a Pokemon game, or review an upcoming Nintendo product without getting a false copyright claim on your channel, which goes against fair use. To them, making a video talking about a video game or doing a playthrough of the game with your own added commentary was synonymous with stealing their intellectual property, but they were willing to cut these YouTubers a deal. If you sign up for their Nintendo Ambassador program and became a Nintendo Ambassador, we'll let you post your Nintendo game reviews and Pokemon Let's Plays. It's just that you can never talk about anything other than Nintendo-related products, and if we watch your videos and don't like the cut of your jib, you're done. So it was basically a choice of, would you rather become a Nintendo bootlicker, or not discuss Nintendo-related anything at all? And I remember the general YouTube gaming community being extremely pissed about this. Even some of the YouTubers I watched back then who grew up with and were reviewing Nintendo games at the time had to take a temporary boycott of showing off Nintendo games on their channel, for fear of it being taken down under the bullshit excuse of copyright infringement. And as crazy and draconian as this Nintendo MCN was, there were content creators who had no problem selling out to Nintendo and falling for their bullshit hook, line, and sinker, some of whom you might still follow to this day. As far as I know, the most recent thing with Nintendo fanboys, and the final example I want to talk about in this video, is the whole knee-jerk reaction to palworld, because they were claiming it was using AI-generated assets. Some of the pals look similar to Pokemon designs that already exist, and they were noticing some similar gameplay mechanics too. Basically, they were making the claim that Pocket Pair Inc. was plagiarizing Pokemon, and that Nintendo should do something about it. I already made a video giving my opinion on the whole palworld AI situation, so if you want to check it out, I'll make sure to link it below in the description, because it would be redundant to go into my whole AI art apologetics rant for this video when I already did that. Instead, what I'll do is highlight some of the things that Nintendo fanboys, and even scorned artists on Twitter were bitching at palworld and Pocket Pair Inc. for, and why they were ignorant for doing so. All I ask is that you watch till the end of this segment before clicking away or leaving a hasty comment. Getting the basic facts out of the way, Pokemon was not the first franchise to incorporate monster taming mechanics. Shin Megami Tensei and Dragon Quest did those things first, and these franchises have been around since the 80s. But if you want to talk about direct influences, the first Saga game, or Final Fantasy Legends 1 on the Game Boy, was cited as an inspiration for the Pokemon games, and it's not hard to see why if you only play it for an hour or so. In terms of their towns, the overhead camera, and the unique class system, they look and feel pretty similar to each other. Oh, but just because the Pokemon franchise was inspired by older existing works doesn't mean it's plagiarism. The art style that they use for the monsters in Dragon Quest and the demons in Shin Megami Tensei are completely different, and the monster mechanics themselves serve completely different purposes. So it's a completely different situation. Okay, fine, I'll give you a better example then. How about the Dream Eaters in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance? Now, Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, much like palworld, is completely different from Pokemon in terms of the core gameplay, and the way you use them in combat is also completely different. They act as little side buddies to help you kill off enemies, and they each have a unique super move to make fighting a little easier at the cost of their limit gauge. But the designs of the Dream Eaters don't look too far out of place from the Gen 6 Pokemon games on the 3DS in terms of their model structure. They all have the same cute, cuddly, colorful aesthetic that Game Freak uses for the designs of some of their Pokemon too. But that's not even the weirdest comparison I can make. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, much like the Pokemon games on the 3DS, have a menu where you can feed and train your Dream Eaters to give them boosted stats. Now, when did Pokemon X and Y come out? 2013. When did Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance come out? 2012. Did Square Enix try to sue Nintendo for stealing their training menu idea? Did Nintendo try to sue Square Enix for making monsters that are designed with the same aesthetic? Or, and hear me out for a second, did they just not give a shit because nobody can trademark the idea of having a menu where you play Pet Simulator with brightly colored virtual animals? Oh, but the Dream Eater training in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance serves a different purpose than the Pokemon ME menus. Sure, the Dream Eaters have a similar aesthetic. Pokemon ME plays out similar to the Dream Eater training. But at the end of the day, they serve different purposes, and the overall games themselves are completely different in terms of gameplay. For example, in palworld, you can throw a ball at pals and they act just like Pokeballs in the Pokemon games. How is that not a directly copied idea? You remember the Mega Evolutions in Pokemon X and Y? You remember how every time you used a Mega Evolution on a Pokemon, your trainer model would show an animation of him or her flashing their little Mega Ring Digivice to make them Mega Evolve? And I just want to point out that I'm being 100% facetious here. I don't give a shit if Pokemon borrows a couple of ideas from Digimon and incorporates them into their own games. I'll joke about it because I was a Digitard growing up as much as I was a Poketard growing up, and I don't see why one IP is held to a higher standard, or why they can't use some stuff from each other within reason. Hell, I'm such a rare, unbiased statistic when it comes to the whole Pokemon versus Digimon debate, that I'm sure if I were to tell you that I watched Digimon on Jetix and got into that before I even had a Game Boy Advance, or watched the Pokemon anime at all, you'd think I'm some government plant. But the reason I bring all these examples up is to ask this very simple question. Why is it that when Nintendo borrows ideas from other existing properties, it's an inspiration, but when Pocket Pair Inc. does it to Pokemon, it's obvious plagiarism and it must be stopped? Does Nintendo own the trademarks for running around in an open world, catching brightly colored monsters inside balls, and have them craft items for you in a base that you constantly need to upgrade? You see how stupid the whole palworld plagiarized Pokemon argument is the more you actually think about it? Because when I was searching for an image of the Dream Eater Fin Fatale to compare it to images of Pokemon that look similar, I ended up getting this goulash of different fictional fish creatures. That thing in the center that looks like a Viva Pinata character is actually from a mobile game called Hungry Shark Evolution. Such a shame that Ubisoft would try to rip off Rare like that. And look at all the other fish creatures that could be infringing on someone else's ideas. Overflow! Overflow! As for Pocket Pair Inc. using AI-generated art, if you want to hear my full opinion on that, you can click on the video I made about that topic previously down below in the description. So after Palworld got released on Early Access, Nintendo was getting bombarded with emails from Nintendrones, foaming at the mouth, informing them about what they already knew. That there's an indie game with a monster catching mechanic, and some of the pals looked like they were ripped off of certain Pokemon designs. And what did Nintendo do about it? Nothing. Well, I mean, they shut down a fan mod that changes the pals to Pokemon, because Nintendo can't help themselves, and I saw a bunch of ads on Twitch for the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC at the time, which could be a coincidence, but that's about it. Palworld is still available on Steam to buy, and even though it doesn't have over 1 million concurrent players like it did at launch, it still sold over 20 million copies, and if you compare that to other hits that sold similar numbers, it's doing just fine. I don't know why Palworld detractors were claiming that it had the biggest concurrent player drop, as if it were all doom and gloom for the project, and it was just a fad game when it was never going to realistically keep up that million player count. Most games that reach 1 million players at once don't keep up that number at all. If you look at the most played games on SteamDB and organize them in order of all-time peak, as of me writing this script, it has more people playing it right now than Cyberpunk 2077, Valheim and Terraria, and nobody is calling those games irrelevant. They just each have their own respectable fandom like any other successful title. So yeah, this whole Palworld controversy is just another example of how Nintendo fanboys like to stretch and bend the truth to fit their narrative because they live in their own little hug box, and enjoy white knighting for Nintendo. Overall, just like I said in my previous Nintendo rant video, if there's anything you can learn from all this, don't give companies like Nintendo credit for things that they never actually created or pioneered themselves. And don't fall for any of their gimmicks that they try to sell, because most of the time they're just reinventing the wheel. And while the future of Nintendo may seem glum, because they've been relying on underpowered hardware for a while, which has been deterring a lot of third-party support, just keep in mind that you, the consumer, pretty much decide whether or not they stay afloat, and you shouldn't buy into a gimmick that's stupid and impractical and will be seen as a relic of the previous decade. Despite the fact that I've now made 2 videos criticizing Nintendo, I do generally think that they've learned from their major mistakes during the Wii U era, and I'm sure the Nintendo Switch 2, or whatever they choose to call it, will sell like hotcakes, be 100% backwards compatible with all the Switch games you've bought since 2017, and third-party devs will port over a good number of their games on there just like it was back during the first few years of the Switch's lifespan, because of the updated handheld tech that's grown exponentially over the last 7 or 8 years. I always say to vote with your wallet. It's okay to have a console preference. It's even okay to only be a fan of games made by one company. But it's never okay to blindly defend that company for doing something retarded. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.